At the crack of dawn, Greg, a 46-year-old white man with a stocky build, was jolted awake by noise coming from next door. Irritated, he pushed aside the blinds, his eyes narrowing at the sight. The house next door had new tenants. A tall, muscular black man, maybe early 40s, was hauling boxes onto the porch. Greg's scowl deepened as two police officers stepped out of the man's house. He didn't know why they were there, but he didn't care. Without hesitation, he yanked open his front door and yelled, "Hey, black criminal, keep it down. It's too damn early for this crap. Don't make the cops come back and haul your ass to jail." The man, Cameron, stood still, unreadable. He adjusted the boxes in his arms but said nothing. Feeling smug, Greg turned back toward his house, but something near the property line caught his eye. A large box, half on his lawn. His irritation flared. He stomped over and kicked it hard, sending it skidding across the pavement. "Get this filthy black trash off my land." Cameron finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Why are you damaging my property?" Greg sneered. "Your junk's on my side. You should be thanking me for not doing worse." Cameron's jaw tightened. His hands balled into fists, but instead of retaliating, he took a slow breath, picked up his box and walked inside. Greg smirked. "That's right," he muttered. "Knew you'd back down. Probably scared I'll call the cops again." He shut the door, completely unaware that the real danger in his neighborhood wasn't Cameron. It was himself. "How are you feeling watching this? Drop an emoji to show your reaction." The next morning, Greg took out his trash, only to spot Cameron standing near his garbage bin. The man's broad shoulders stiffened when he noticed Greg approaching. Greg's eyes narrowed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Cameron hesitated. "I was just looking for something," he muttered, barely above a whisper. Greg sneered, his contempt curling his lips. "Figures. Trash like you belongs in the trash." Without waiting for an explanation, he swung his garbage bag with exaggerated force, sending it straight into Cameron's chest. The bag split on impact, spilling coffee grounds and rotting leftovers onto his shirt. Greg smirked. "There, take your pick, you filthy black rat." He didn't bother watching Cameron's reaction. He turned on his heel, stomped back inside, and slammed the door shut. Through the window, he expected to see Cameron fuming, humiliated, maybe even retaliating. Instead, the man simply stood there, wiping himself off with slow, deliberate movements. His expression was blank, but Greg noticed something. Cameron's hands trembled slightly. Days passed in uneasy silence. No noise, no confrontation. Greg felt a smug sense of relief. Maybe the guy had finally learned his place. But that illusion shattered one afternoon when Greg glanced outside and saw Cameron standing in his yard, holding a pair of binoculars staring directly at his house. Greg's stomach twisted. His blood boiled. Without thinking, he stormed to his gun cabinet, grabbed his shotgun, and marched straight to Cameron's front door. His fist pounded against the wood, the sound echoing through the quiet street. "Open the damn door, you bastard!" A moment later, Cameron answered. He barely had time to react before Greg shoved the shotgun barrel against his forehead. Greg's voice was low and dangerous. "You spying on me?" His finger hovered over the trigger. "If I catch you looking at my house again, I'll blow your damn head off." Cameron's breath hitched. His eyes widened in fear, hands instinctively raising in surrender. I won't do it again. Please don't shoot." Greg sneered at the man's trembling form, basking in the power he held. His fingers stayed on the trigger for a moment longer, just enough to let Cameron sweat, before he finally lowered the gun. "You're lucky I'm feeling generous," he spat, "but don't think I'll let it slide next time." As Greg turned to leave, he didn't notice the quiet intensity in Cameron's eyes. The man stood still, watching as Greg walked away, his expression unreadable. Greg slammed his door, muttering under his breath. He thought he had won, thought he had put the man in his place. What he didn't realize was that the storm was already brewing, and when it hit, there'd be no place to hide. That night, Greg slept soundly, confident he had established dominance over his new neighbor. But in the early hours, a sharp knock at the door shattered his peace. Annoyed, he swung it open, expecting trouble, and there stood Cameron holding a plate of cookies. His face was composed, his voice measured. "I made these to introduce myself." Greg's expression soured instantly. "I don't need to play neighborly with your kind," he snapped. Before Cameron could respond, Greg snatched the plate from his hands and shoved it right back into his face. The cookies crumbled, scattering onto the porch. Greg smirked, waiting for an outburst, a reaction, something. But Cameron only stood there for a moment, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped his face clean. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his house. Greg watched him go, reveling in his petty triumph. "Pathetic," he muttered, slamming the door shut. The following morning, Greg carried his trash to the curb when something caught his eye. Cameron was near his garbage bin again. This time hunched over, his back turned. Greg's patience snapped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. Cameron flinched but didn't turn around. "I was just looking for something," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Greg sneered. "Figures. Trash like you belongs in the trash." He didn't wait for an answer. With exaggerated force, he hurled the garbage bag in his hands, striking Cameron square in the back. The impact sent coffee grounds and rotting leftovers splattering across his shirt. Greg chuckled. "Go ahead. Take your pick, you filthy black rat." He turned and stomped back inside, slamming the door behind him. Through the window, he expected to see anger, retaliation, something. But Cameron simply stood there, wiping himself off with slow, deliberate movements. His face was unreadable, but Greg noticed the same trembling in his hands as before. Then something changed. For days, Cameron stayed quiet, his house dark, no noise, no movement. Greg felt a smug sense of victory, but that illusion shattered one afternoon. Looking out his window, he spotted Cameron standing outside, still calm, staring directly at his house through a pair of binoculars. Greg's stomach twisted into a knot. Rage surged through him. Without thinking, he grabbed his shotgun and stormed toward Cameron's door. This time, he wasn't going to let things slide. Greg's fist pounded against Cameron's door, the shotgun gripped tightly in his other hand. His pulse pounded in his ears, his fury blinding. "Open the damn door, you bastard!" A few seconds later, Cameron appeared, his face unreadable. He barely had time to react before Greg shoved the barrel of the shotgun against his forehead. "You spying on me?" Greg's voice was low and dangerous. "If I catch you looking at my house again, I'll blow your damn head off." Cameron's breath hitched, his hands raised instinctively in surrender. I won't do it again. Please don't shoot." Greg sneered, savoring the power he held. His finger hovered over the trigger, letting Cameron sweat before finally lowering the gun. "You're lucky I'm feeling generous," he spat, "but don't think I'll let it slide next time." As Greg stormed back to his house, he didn't notice the quiet intensity in Cameron's eyes. The man stood there, unmoving, watching. That night, Greg awoke to an unusual noise in the living room. His instincts kicked in. Grabbing his pistol, he checked his security cameras. Cameron. He was inside the house, crouched near the safe. Greg sneered. "That damn rat is dead tonight." Moving quietly, he crept downstairs, gun raised. But just as he entered the living room, something made his stomach drop. The basement door, his secret basement door, was wide open. A cold panic gripped him. Ignoring Cameron for a moment, he rushed down the stairs. His worst fear was confirmed. The entire basement, his warehouse of illicit drugs, the processing equipment, the cannabis plants, was fully exposed. And Cameron stood in the middle of it all, phone in hand, filming everything. Greg's rage exploded. He pointed his gun directly at Cameron's forehead. Typical, a filthy rat sneaking into someone else's house to steal. Cameron tucked his phone away. "I'm not stealing anything." Greg's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Unlucky for you, you picked the wrong house. The house of a drug lord." Cameron's face drained of color. His voice trembled. "Please, don't kill me. I'll leave. I won't say anything. I swear." Greg had heard this before. The same desperate pleading. It didn't move him. Number? The only thing that stays silent is the dead. A twisted smile curled on Greg's lips as he squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit Cameron square in the chest. His body crumpled to the ground. Greg grinned. Another problem solved, or so he thought. Greg exhaled slowly, relishing the silence. Cameron lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. "Should have stayed in your lane," Greg muttered. Chuckling, he retrieved a sharp knife from a nearby workbench. "Guess I'll make use of you," he murmured, dragging Cameron's limp body toward the back of the basement. But then, something impossible happened. A faint noise. Greg froze. A low, ragged breath escaped from Cameron's lips. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, Cameron sat up. Greg's grip on the knife tightened. "No way," he whispered. His heart pounded as Cameron lifted his head, blood smeared across his chest, but his eyes sharp. Too sharp. Cameron smirked. "You've been tricked." Before Greg could react, a deafening boom shattered the silence. Gunfire. Outside. Greg whipped around, his instincts flaring. He grabbed his gun, ready to defend his empire. But then, the door burst open, shouting, boots pounding, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Police. A wave of bodies swarmed in, weapons drawn, voices commanding. Before Greg could fire a single shot, they tackled him to the ground, pinning him face first into the concrete. His own gun clattered across the floor. He thrashed, his rage boiling over. "Get the hell off me!" But the officers weren't listening. They pulled his arms behind his back, locking handcuffs around his wrists. His face was shoved against the cold floor as he struggled. And then he saw them. Boots. Cameron's boots. Slowly, Greg lifted his head. Standing over him, alive, untouched, and completely in control, was Cameron. Greg's mind reeled. "How?" Cameron tilted his head, his expression calm, almost amused. "You really thought I was just some helpless black guy, didn't you?" Greg's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You thought I was a problem, but you were the real problem all along," Greg thrashed, his fury spiraling into full-blown panic. "That damn black bastard deserves to die," he roared. The officers didn't even flinch. They yanked him upright, dragging him toward the exit. Greg fought against them, but it was useless. His empire had crumbled in an instant. "You're under arrest for drug trafficking, manufacturing, and murder," one of the officers stated. Greg's breath came in short, ragged bursts. His mind still refused to accept what was happening. Cameron stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for Greg to hear. "I'm the head of the anti-drug squad," he said, "and I came here to take you down." Greg's world collapsed. He had underestimated Cameron from the very beginning, and now he was going to pay the price. Greg's screams echoed through the night as the officers dragged him up the basement stairs. His mind raced, his pulse hammering in his ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was his house, his empire. He had the power, the control. How had it all fallen apart? The flashing red and blue lights outside burned into his vision as they threw him into the back of a squad car. His wrists ached from the handcuffs, but it was nothing compared to the crushing realization settling in his chest. He was finished. Through the barred window, he saw Cameron standing at the curb watching in silence. No fear, no hesitation, just quiet, unwavering authority. Greg's rage bubbled up one last time. "You set me up, you son of a—" The car door slammed shut, cutting him off. Days later, the headlines exploded. "Notorious drug lord taken down in undercover operation." Greg was charged with drug trafficking, manufacturing, and murder. The case was airtight. Cameron had seen to that. And Cameron? He was promoted for his work, hailed as the man who dismantled one of the biggest drug operations in the state. At his promotion ceremony, standing before a crowd, he spoke with quiet conviction. "I hope one day this world will be free of crime," he said, "and that racial discrimination will be eradicated from every mind." The room erupted in applause. Greg would spend the rest of his life rotting behind bars. And Cameron? He walked away victorious. Cameron walked away victorious, but the fight for justice never ends. Stories like this remind us that prejudice blinds and underestimation can be deadly. How many people like Greg still roam free? How many Camerons are out there, risking everything to bring them down? If you believe in justice, accountability, and the power of the truth, help spread the message. Like, share, and subscribe to support more stories that expose injustice. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Cameron's place?